The one thing about the Browns, like it was an easy decision to move on from Amari Cooper. Being 1-5 makes it easy to move on from some guys if you're willing to go that route.
Absolutely.
I do think the bad spot that the Bengals are in, 2-4, and by the way, not a bad spot. You're still in a playoff push, right? You're still in a position to make the playoffs, to get to the wild card, no doubt. But the Bengals are still in that in-between mode where it's like a week ago you guys thought, oh no, the season's over. Then you get a win over the Giants. You see the landscape of the AFC. The wild card's still very realistic. The deficiencies, you're still worried about that defense, even though that defense did technically show up against the Giants. But the thing is, I don't think you guys know what the hell is going on in Cincinnati.
No.
You one week you think it's all offense, no defense, and then you beat the Giants with barely any offense, and your defense holds them to 7 points. Like, it just didn't make sense, but a win's a win. But the Bengals at 2-4, it's like, if they did, let's say they did lose to the Giants, I think it's an easy decision. I think you move on from Tee Higgins. I think you try to get something in return, especially when you look at what the Browns got for Cooper and what the Raiders got for Davante Adams. But that 2-4 range, you're still not really sure who you are yet. You get a win against Cleveland. I think you feel pretty good about that. You're a game within 500. Now you can take off. But if something goes wrong this Sunday against the Browns, and you drop to 2-5 on the season, what's your guys' perception and takeaway of how the Bengals should handle the Tee Higgins situation? When you see what the Raiders got for Adams, when you see what the Browns got for Cooper, if something goes wrong this weekend where the Bengals do not overcome the Cleveland Browns, and as wild as it sounds, every year we think the Bengals are going to beat the Browns, and the Browns just seem to have their number, even on worse occasions in years past at times. I am curious if that does happen, 2-5, are you guys going to start pushing we need to get some draft capital back from Tee Higgins?
So third-round picks for both Cooper and Adams. Since 2000, there's only been 34 in-season wide receiver trades. 17 of those 34 have included at least a fourth-round pick. Obviously, when you're talking in-season trades, it's very rare you're talking about a player the caliber of Tee Higgins. Obviously, Davante Adams and Amari Cooper would fall close to that range, but I still think age puts Tee Higgins well above them in terms of the value that you would want back in order to move him. Since 2018, which is as far back as you have to go to see the last in-season trade involving a wide receiver and a first-round pick, it was when Amari Cooper was sent from the Raiders to the Cowboys. I don't think that that's feasible for Tee Higgins, who's not signed long-term. He's on the franchise tag this year. You're going to have to give him a long-term extension. And if the Bengals are selling Tee Higgins actively during the season, then they're waving the white flag and saying, hey, we're out of it. So you're going to have to take a little bit of your expectation on what the return is going to be off because of that, and teams aren't going to give up the same amount if you're desperately trying to get rid of players. There's only been 2 trades since 2018 with wide receivers in season that have had second-round picks. Obviously, Davante Adams and Amari Cooper doesn't change that. That's Chase Claypool going to the Bears and Mohamed Sanu going to the Patriots in 2022 and 2019, respectively. I think that is probably the ceiling you could expect from a Tee Higgins trade during the season, and that's why I don't really want to trade him. I think if you're just getting a second-round pick, that's not exactly what I want unless you're going to trade him to a Panthers or a Jaguars, and I don't know why they would make that move in the middle of the season. In order for me to trade Tee Higgins for a second-round pick, it would have to be for a top 40 pick or so, top 45 maybe at worst, and I don't think that that's something that you're going to get in season. I still think, and I've been saying it all year, I think the Bengals' best course of action for Tee Higgins is to double tag him again next offseason for 120% of what he makes this year, and then move him at that point if you can't reach a long-term extension. I'm still holding out hope that maybe there's a long-term extension in the future. That hope dwindles every single day, but we're here, and I don't think an in-season trade is the best course of action for Tee Higgins. I think you get more value if you wait till the offseason. I think him playing for the Bengals gives a chance for more value. If he continues to put up numbers, proves he can stay healthy down the stretch, I think trading Tee Higgins right now would be some of the lowest value you could ever get out of him.
Yeah, if this season has shown me anything, it's that I want to extend Tee Higgins. I want to keep Tee Higgins on my roster. The offense is what keeps this machine going, and the defense is the failed project. I don't know who we can get on defense that can save them at this point. I think they're so far gone that even if, let's say you don't pay Tee Higgins and you use that money to get one player on defense, maybe two players I don't think fixes our defense. I think there's some serious issues going on back there, and I don't know if we're going to be able to solve them by getting rid of Tee Higgins. Now, if we can get a second rounder for Tee Higgins, then maybe we can start talking about it. But based on what you just said there, trading wide receivers for third rounders, I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in the third rounder for Tee Higgins. I'm not. Tee Higgins is better than the third round pick, and I trust the Bengals. Let me rephrase. I trust Tee Higgins to be good more than I trust the Bengals to draft well with an additional third round pick. It's probably the right move, But at the end of the day, if the offense ain't broke, I'm not going to try to fix it. And right now, it works with Jamar Chase and Tee Higgins. It's one of the best wide receiver duos in the league. The chemistry with Joe Burrow, I'd argue, is the best in the NFL. And the offense works. So I'm not interested in moving on from Tee Higgins. If it goes terribly wrong, maybe, I guess, if you're throwing in a second rounder. But like Jacob just said, I don't see it happening. I really don't. I don't see a second rounder being offered for Tee Higgins. And I think if the option's a fourth round pick, I'm out. I'm completely out. 2 fourth rounders, out. A third and a fourth, out.
I think the ceiling's probably a third and a fifth.
Yeah.
No interest.
It's just like, I'm good. So we'll move on with Tee Higgins next year, and hopefully the defense can just be better. Next year's draft is going to be massive because you have to draft defensive players rounds 1 through 4. Unless, of course, Tee Higgins isn't there. Then it changes a little bit. But at the end of the day, right now, the Cincinnati Bengals have a defensive problem, and I don't think it gets solved with a fourth-round draft pick. I don't. And I don't trust the Bengals to draft well with that fourth-round pick.
So the reason, and I brought up the third-round return for Amari Cooper and Davante Adams because they're 2 receivers that are 31 years old. They have a lot of mileage on them. Tee Higgins does not. And that's why I thought that return for Cooper and Adams, I thought Adams wasn't surprising to get the third round. I was surprised for Cleveland to get the third for Cooper. But if that's the market for a 31-year-old wide receiver, Tee Higgins, to me, is not a third-rounder in return. I think you would at least maybe, depending on the desperation of a team, I think the Bills are desperate. I don't think that the Browns are going to get a third-rounder for Cooper by many, if not any other team out there. I think the only other team that desperately needed a wide receiver at this point was the Buffalo Bills, and I think that the Browns played on that desperation and were able to pull that off. I don't know if there's a team that's desperate enough to go all in to give up a lot of prospects to go get Tee Higgins. That's the other question. Is there any teams out there, Jacob, or anyone, is there any team out there that's a Tee Higgins away from being a Super Bowl favorite at this point? I mean, the Commanders. I mean, is there a team out there that's like, you had Tee Higgins?
There's one.
There's
one, and the Bengals wouldn't pick up the phone. If the Kansas City Chiefs got Tee Higgins, that offense would take a massive step. He'd fill in for Rashee Rice perfectly, and it would change everything there, and the Bengals would not even pick up the phone. I firmly believe that.
No matter what they would offer him.
I really don't think so. I don't think so. Not at this point, not in this run. You don't give the Chiefs Tee Higgins. You just don't do it. And I think that's the only team after the Bills made that move that is truly a Tee Higgins away from competing for a Super Bowl, or at least, not that the Chiefs can't compete for a Super Bowl without him, but at least jack that window all the way open. If the Chiefs got Tee Higgins, they would maybe move to minus money to win the Super Bowl right after that move. So, yeah, I think they're really the last team left that's a wide receiver away. The only other thing I could think of is maybe a team trying to bolster their rookie quarterback. New England.
Yep.
Washington. Washington, obviously, at this point, we might just talk about them as a contender. But when you have a rookie quarterback, I always put you on the list of trading for a top-tier wide receiver just because that can always open up their play in their young career. We saw what happened to Josh Allen when he was able to get Stephon Diggs early in his career. He took a massive step and has never looked back. So I could see Tee Higgins moving to places like that. And that, again, is part of why I think waiting toward draft season or towards the offseason makes even more sense, because that means there's a whole nother group of teams that has young rookie quarterbacks that they want to try to build around. So along with New England and Washington, who doesn't have elite wide receivers right now and could look to add to that position to help Drake May and Jaden Daniels, you'll have new teams like maybe the Raiders and Carolina who want to add a wide receiver to help their young quarterback in his first season. So I think there's going to be a big market for a player like Tee Higgins in the offseason, hopefully not as a straight-up free agent. I'm talking about trade.
Yeah. I think Tee Higgins probably would garner more than a third, maybe. I know what the offense looks like with him, and I'm not willing to lose that. We haven't seen Jermaine Burton, one of our wide receiving draft picks this year. We haven't seen him. He's a healthy scratch. He's a healthy scratch last week. So I don't know, man. I'm a little. I'm not going to say I'm scared, because if you have Jamar and Joe, I'm still very, very confident in the offense. But I am a little bit worried that we don't have that good wide receiver too if we move on from him, and I'm not willing to move on from him. Not right now. Not at this moment.
And keep in mind, all of this was based on if things don't go well Sunday against the Browns and you find yourself at 2-5. It's based on that, Elliot. If they beat Cleveland, by the way, I'm here to say if they beat Cleveland and most likely beat Cleveland on Sunday, they're not entertaining any move for Tee Higgins at this point because the season's still very much alive. It was just based on that. scenario, if that's the case as far as that goes. But yeah, Jacob, you're right. There's only one team. And by the way, you bring up the Patriots and others. I think, and the Panthers, I think those are teams that in the offseason value Tee Higgins a lot more than they do at the deadline. At the deadline,
100%.
I think the Bills were desperate. And, the Bills were desperate. Let me ask you, if the Bills had approached the Bengals about Tee Higgins, if the Bengals were in a similar situation at 1-5, would you have been fine with the Bills? Because I know that the Chiefs are that team that everyone, like the Bengals especially, looks at like we're not helping them. But would you have been fine if they would have helped Josh Allen? Keep in mind the confidence of an organization. Like, hey, we don't want to send you help, but we really need that return if you're willing to give it to us. The Chiefs had the guts to send Tyreek Hill to the Miami Dolphins. They had the guts to send him to the Miami Dolphins, all right? It's not as if it's unheard of to send elite talent within a conference. Would you have been fine if the Bills would have got Tee Higgins if that was the case?
The Bills send Xavier Worthy to Kansas City.
Yep.
So it happens a lot. But, I mean, I wouldn't have loved it, but it always comes down to what the return is. And if the return's great for Tee Higgins, then send him wherever the return's the best. But I'm certainly not happy about trading him to a top-level AFC contender, no matter how you spin it. I mean, that's just – you have to think about then playing him some point down the line and him having a big game and how much that would hurt and how much that would add to the loss in the moment, and that would just kill. So that would always just be in the front of my mind if we moved a player that I love as much as I love Tee Higgins to a team like the Bills or the Chiefs. But it all comes down to the return, and if one of those teams is going to give you, say, a first-round pick for a guy on an expiring contract or something like that, I certainly think you make the move. But I do think the price is higher for one of those teams.
100%.
I think the price is higher for one of those teams than, say, the Broncos or a team in the NFC that you don't necessarily plan on seeing in the near future, at least in games that matter. I know the regular season schedule rotates all the time, but we're talking about Super Bowl and playoff here, and that's what I mean with Kansas City and Buffalo. If you're seeing them in the AFC Championship or divisional round, and Tee Higgins is going, 8 for 145 and 2 touchdowns, that's going to twist the knife in your back a little bit more than if he goes somewhere else and flourishes. And I certainly want to root for Tee Higgins his entire career, Cincinnati or not. So I would greatly appreciate Mike Brown if he sends him elsewhere, not sending him in the AFC North or the Bills or Kansas City or anyone else like that.
Yeah, the Chiefs are the first team. If you have to talk about Bengals rivals, the Chiefs are the first team removed from the division. It's the AFC North, it's the Kansas City Chiefs, and then there's a large gap. I think you could trade Tee Higgins to the Buffalo Bills. I don't think you play the Buffalo Bills a ton. We've played the Chiefs every year for 4 years now.
Feels like it.
4 years, 5 years, however many years it's been. We've played the Kansas City Chiefs. The Buffalo Bills we've played a decent amount as well. But at the end of the day, I'm not too concerned about trading Tee Higgins to the Bills if the return is as good as it would have to be to any team, let alone just the Buffalo Bills.
Justin Kenner, Casey McAllister, Elliot Rearing, Jacob Tissett with you here. This is Off the Bench. On Twitter, or X, whatever we call it nowadays, but the 33rd team, I don't know if you follow them on Twitter, but the 33rd team, with, of course, the needs that Detroit now has after losing one of their premier pass rushers, they're in the market for an elite pass rusher. The 33rd team had tweeted out one target that the Lions could potentially look at is on the Cincinnati Bengals roster on the defensive side of the ball, of course. They say don't be shocked if the Lions try to go after Trey Hendrickson of the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, one of the trade scenarios that existed was, of course, obviously, Detroit receives Trey Hendrickson and the Cincinnati Bengals receive a 2025 second-round pick. That seems a little wild to think about right now, but again, let's go to that scenario. Things don't go well in Cleveland on Sunday, and we come in to do the show on Monday at 2-5 for the Bengals. That sounds crazy now, is this as crazy of a scenario come Monday if things don't go well in Cleveland?
Yes. I think that's a crazy scenario for Trey Hendrickson. Just a second-round pick. I think at least you're getting at least another mid-round pick in there, second and a fifth or something like that. The Lions are desperate. They're going to do a trade for someone with relative prominence. They're in a Super Bowl window right now. They can win this year even without Aiden Hutchinson, but I think they are going to make a change on that defense and go get someone to help that pass rush, but I don't think a second-round pick for Trey Hendrickson is feasible even at 2-5.
I also don't think the Bengals are going to be willing to trade their only good defensive player. It doesn't make sense at all. If you trade Trey Hendrickson,
2-5. At 2-5, your season's done.
It doesn't even matter though. I
agree.
Trey Hendrickson, who's going to play defense next year? And by the way, and I know eventually you have to say the Bengals have to draft well and we have to trust that they will. I still don't trust that they will draft well. And I don't trust that they can draft a solid defensive player. And if we're trading our one good player away for a draft pick, I don't know if I trust the Bengals to capitalize on that draft pick. Same way with Tee Higgins. You cannot trade Trey Hendrickson. Can't do it.
Keep in mind, though, Trey Hendrickson wasn't happy with his money situation last year and was able to bottle that up and put it to the side because he felt they were playing for a Super Bowl this year. Things are really bad in Cincinnati, and if he doesn't feel that, though, like he felt, okay, put that off to the side like T did. I'm going to put this off to the side because, hey, we're in a window to win a Super Bowl. I don't want to be a distraction. Who's to say that he's not willing to be a distraction if he doesn't feel like they're competing for a Super Bowl next year? That's something to consider as well, because are the Bengals willing to pay him and give him another extension? That's the other question mark.
Oh, I absolutely would be open to trading Trey Hendrickson. I just think straight up for a second-round pick for a team that's more desperate than anyone in the league for an edge rusher is a little crazy. I think if
and the compensation, I agree. I'm not for that compensation. They should get more. I just meant moving.
I thought that trade is what you were asking about. Yeah,
my bad.
I think trading Trey Hendrickson's more likely than trading Tee Higgins at 2-5. I think that's probably the most likely move at 2-5 because you're going to use that extra tag on T to ease that offseason struggle of the trade or extension. So Hendrickson, you're going to have a tough time if you don't plan on extending him for big-time money because all your focus is going to be on these two wide receivers in the offseason. So if you don't plan on getting a Hendrickson extension done or figuring out some kind of money plan, I would certainly prefer to get some kind of value for him than letting him walk for free. But again, with every trade, it's a boring way to analyze it. I'd rather just be, oh, yeah, trade him or don't trade him. It all comes down to the compensation. You have to get something that makes sense to move Trey Hendrickson off your roster. And Trey Hendrickson is a top 5 to 7 on a bad day edge rusher in football, maybe even higher than that on a good day. I mean, he's a really, really special player who puts up consistent production year after year. I think he warrants a pretty healthy trade package.
Yeah.
I think he's more than special. I think, unfortunately for him, he has been overshadowed, like with how bad the defense has been. The defense has been the storyline the last 2 years, and it's been about how bad it is. If that defense is just average, he is shining like a diamond around the NFL circles right now. And I think there's in NFL circles, there's a lot of teams that will value him. He just doesn't get propped up or talked about enough because he's one of the best defensive players in the NFL on a really bad defense, and I think that has overshadowed his production in Cincinnati, no doubt.